Thank you very much, everybody. We're glad to be here today and glad to have the opportunity to make this presentation on CenturyLink. Schaeffer and I are going to talk to you about getting this project going, and a big part of that is that it was a new area where hardly anybody had done BIM before, and we'll talk about that as we go through today and discuss it. Now, to introduce you to the South, I would like to turn to Johnny Giacuzzo and let him tell you about what CenturyLink is all about.
Well, I understand y'all want a little bit information here on what's going on in this here part of the town. So the people like me come from down the bayou, that's what they talk. And so we get a lot of our culture and everything from down south of I-10. So if you want a little bit of culture from the south, you come down to South Louisiana and you pass yourself a good time down here.
So that was Johnny Giacuzzo, and as you can see, the video cut a little short because of the sound, but he's very good at what he does, and he has lots of experience, and he's done industrial, he's done computer automation, he's done all sorts of things, but there is just a different culture in the South that makes it a fun project and makes it really neat to do. And we'll talk about that a little as we go too. Okay, the introduction to the project itself. This is the CenturyLink building, 250,000 square foot addition to what they already had for the existing headquarters there in Monroe. It has a technology, it's an office center, but it's a technology center as well. So along with office space, it has a data center inside of it. It has a full food cafeteria, food service for thousands of people a day. It has auditoriums for training and public meetings. And then out back, you can see the parking garage with the mechanical system. The whole fourth level of the building is a mechanical penthouse, and it is just a very spectacular building to have had the chance to participate in, or be participating in currently. Here is same model, but we've cut it a little bit. There is a monumental stair that you'll see in part of the videos and clips later, just a spectacular sort of architectural feature that you love to see and be a part of in the building. A lot of view glass. So that whole inside of that radius is all open view glass out into this very nice courtyard. And that view glass is also the solar glass, where it'll actually darken and lighten with electrical current for the different times of the day. And that'll have the most photovoltaic glass of any project in North America. Additional items on the project, very tight schedule, a lot to be done on it. And so here is a rendering of what it'll look like when it's done. You can see that a significant part of that curve there is a green roof. And you can also see that there is a lot of trees sitting around this project. In one of the pre-bid meetings, the owner, Wolf, who you'll see in a minute, he made it very clear to everybody that there was two expectations, major things. They'll get you kicked off the job if you violate either one of these. One was cutting the fiber to their data center. Okay, we accept that. If anybody cuts your fiber, we'll kick them off for you. They're gone. The second was if you damage or kill a tree. And that all of a sudden told us they were very proud of that pecan orchard that was on their property. And so we had to actually model and identify the trees that would be removed and identify the trees that would stay, and every one of those trees has stayed. And so that was a very significant part of this project and the culture that we strove to address. It's in an urban city, but it has a very rural feel to it because of its location. And this video is give you an idea of exactly where the project was a short time ago. you could see that as part of that, you saw some of the rural setting and the beautiful scenery it is, but it's still well under construction. And so a lot of the things that we're applying, we've just finished the coordination for all practical purposes. And now we're seeing how well they're applying all of that. The next step is team selection. That's an important part of how this project came together. And Wolf had hoped to be here today. He is the representative for CenturyLink and is the owner on the project and was unable to make it. And so we were able to get his comments and bring him virtually to visit us.
I'm the director for design and construction for CenturyLink, so I'm overseeing the project from the design, the construction, and the budget. On this particular project, all of our selected consultants, the architect, the structural engineer, our civil engineer, even our geotechnical, they all were BIM capable and had that software capability. BIM only really came up as we started interviewing the additional consultants on the project, the consulting engineers, and then when we brought Yates in as a construction manager, it became apparent to all of us, particularly in my case, our shop, having not used BIM before, the advantages that we would have gained from it.
So by happenstance, a whole bunch of their design team was already using modeling. And by happenstance, their consultants were using modeling, and they started hearing more and more about this BIM. And then they bought the construction management firm on board, and we said, yeah, we need to do BIM. We have an opportunity here. And so none of the team selection revolved around, hey, we're going to go do BIM. It was all about who is bringing value to this project for very traditional terms. So when it came time to then take that next step, we've decided we're going to do BIM, but now we need to pull in the local contractors and get their local participation. Then this project was very significant to the state of Louisiana as a whole. And the ground opening shows the governor of the state of Louisiana attending the groundbreaking for this project. And when it came down to it, we didn't get to pick contractors based on any degree of BIM qualification. We got to pick local contractors. And no one in Monroe, Louisiana had any BIM experience to speak of. And it turned out, we found out in that MEP pre-bid meeting that the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and sprinkler designers, they were also not modeling. And so they were working in a 2D environment. In fact, Schaeffer was there with me at that pre-bid meeting, and one of the design consultants came up and said, we're so glad you guys are going to be using BIM on this project, because in some locations, we only had 16 inches of overhead space, and all we could do was fit a 16-inch duct in there, and that's all we could figure out. Alarms went off in my head. Did you allow for insulation? Did you allow for anything to cross? Did you allow for anything when you stuck a 16-inch duct in a 16-inch space? And Schaeffer will tell you more about that later. And so part of that, though, knowing that pre-bid meeting was coming and these subs didn't have experience, we invited multiple BIM consultants to be on board to come to that pre-bid meeting. Eichert Consulting showed up, and Schaeffer himself was there. Made all the difference that there was to be had, because all of a sudden these subs who had no idea what they were doing, they were scared, they had a person to talk to that could guide them through. And we'll talk about how many of them ended up electing to go with Eichert to help them and consult them, and the benefits that came from that process when I turned it over to Schaeffer. The whole idea was we foresaw chaos, and we tried to avoid that chaos through these implementations and bringing people on board and having everything in place. So now one of the people that was in charge of the transition, Kirk Shambly, then she's going to talk about a little bit what happened as she was making that transition from what we were doing to the subcontractors starting to take over and perform their own modeling.
A lot of the subcontractors were very overwhelmed when they look at their shop drawings and say, I have to create this virtually. They're like, how do you go from here to building it in a model? So for instance, conduit, they think, oh wow, that's a lot of modeling, a lot of small pieces. And so you just have to kind of help them navigate that process so it's less overwhelming and look at it in small pieces instead of the overall picture. So go phase by phase.
And Kirk really helped with that process. She spent a lot of time on the job site with the contractors, encouraging them, walking them through step by step, phase by phase, and really helped to bring order to what was happening there. There we go. And now I'll let Schaeffer talk about the experience and some of the things they did to help work the project through.
Thank you, Benjamin. As Benjamin said, they invited us onto the project as they were starting to buy out the trades. They gave ICRD Consulting the opportunity to submit prices to the trades, and as a result, about 8 different contracts ended up in our lap on the same project, which was a really unique opportunity. We got to help out Yates on their coordination, and then a lot of the subs, in fact, came to us and said, hey, can you help us out with this? And the great part was these are great builders. They know what they're doing. They've been doing this for centuries. They're really good at what they do. But as far as this new technology, this new sociology, they're not incredibly familiar with it. And so we were able to take this opportunity to introduce them to it for the first time and to do it in a way that it makes it a win-win situation for everybody. At ICRD Consulting, this is one of the things we do most often, and the best really, is we come into a situation where people need to know what's the best solution for our team to use BIM. And it looks like a number of different things. And what we find is the software usually works pretty well. The hardware works pretty well. The problem comes in is the people. Sometimes you have, or oftentimes the problems are with people, but at the same time, the most benefit comes from the people. And so when we approached this project, as we do most projects, it's more about the sociology with the technology, as we heard this morning. It's really the sociology. So as we approached this team and the opportunity we had, a couple of different tools that we use. One of them is the DISC personality assessment. Most people look at this and say, this is not BIM. First of all, who here knows what a DISC personality assessment is? Okay, a few people. Great, great. Most people look at this and say, this is not BIM. This is actually more the sociology side of things. It allows us to analyze both individuals and teams, what their strengths, weaknesses are, what types of communication they use. So here you can see an individual, whether they're an extrovert or an introvert, task-oriented or people-oriented. So we can analyze who's on our team, what are their strengths, how do we communicate with them. And then not only just individual team members, but also all the team members together. You can see here an assessment of an entire team, and you can start seeing what are our strong points, how do we communicate with this team, who in this team is going to fill what role. So this is a tool that ICRD uses to really build teamwork, build communication. If you've not been exposed to the DISC survey, we highly recommend it. I think at our booth we even have a few free ones we'd like to set you up with. But this is a helpful tool to work on the communication and sociology of teamwork. So as Benjamin said, and Wolf said as well, is the design team really had exposure to BIM before the project, but not an intention to do BIM. And so we got to the opportunity to use BIM through the design team originally, and then on into construction as the schedule started construction moving forward and the design was finishing up. We saw two different areas where it was used. First, in the pre-construction, the architecture used BIM for their design. They did a great job. Their models were really pretty nice. We actually ended up using them to assist in coordination. So I know I've talked to a lot of people who are saying, how do we use the models from the design team in coordination through the project? This was what we did on CenturyLink. The structural, they did BIM design for their contract drawings, did a great job. It was a phenomenal experience. The one exception was the MEP designer. They were working exclusively in 2D CAD. And as we've talked about, that actually presented a few, or more than a few, situations where we were able to see benefits from using BIM to help them finalize their design as we found items that needed help with. So as that moved from pre-construction into construction, the team really leaned heavily on ICRD and Yates to help look at what items needed to be finished in the design as construction started. I believe at the moment we're on Bulletin 24. There may be a Bulletin 25 coming out next week. So this is a design that continued on into the construction process significantly, and we ended up being able to help them with that. That looked like in our BIM coordination meetings, the design team was there. They were very responsive, very involved in those. We were able to bring concerns to them. I highly recommend seeing if you can get your design teams to be involved in this process. It's high value. We even had meetings specifically, weekly meetings specifically with the MEP designer, and sometimes bi-weekly meetings to say, what is your design intent here? We have this 16-inch duct in a 16-inch space. Turns out the OD on that duct is not 16 inches, it's 20 inches, and we suddenly have a condition here where we need your input. And so throughout the construction process, we were able to use these tools to present situations to the design team and say, what would you like us to do here? How would you like to proceed with this design? Quick example, this is what I call the uphill drain. If you see there on the right hand of the screen is where the roof drain is installed. In 2-dimension, it's designed to move to the left into the building and then drain down. What you also notice in 3D is that the roof is draining from left to right. So in order for this drain to have worked, we would have had to reverse the properties of gravity and make the water go uphill. And so we presented this to the design team, and we were able to find a workable solution before this was installed. Just an example of how BIM can be used during design to really come up with solutions for these issues. Another way we used BIM during design, during construction, was for cost impact and feasibility. Towards the end of coordination and actually significantly into installation, we had a situation where the owner wanted to add another system of cable trays. And what they did was they said, well, we already know where everything's going because we have this federated BIM model, because we have asked ICRA to help us with that. So they came to us and said, hey, would you please take this concept, which is what you see on the left, which is a straight cable tray, and tell us what that's going to look like if we actually coordinated it and put it in the building. So we went in even before they had bought out the work to a subcontractor, and we're able to say this is what it's going to look like at the end of the day. And they used this for cost impact, for estimating, and then actually for installation. It's a really interesting situation. So I'm going to hand it back over to Benjamin and to talk about how we set the LOD for this process.
So part of coming into this with a bunch of people that had not done it before was knowing that if they don't know what they're doing, there's going to be chaos, and we couldn't deal with that. What we needed to do was be ahead of that and give them good instructions. And so these are the documents that we used: the BIM addendum, execution plan, LOD spec, and we ran through some practice rounds. And I want to address how we use those and then drop back into what we learned in the process of using those. So the BIM addendum, if you're not familiar with it, it's a consensus doc. It's supported by AGC. They were a part of building it. Very useful. I think you should put it on every BIM project you use. We put it on every BIM project we use. Okay. These are the 5 points that we ended up talking about most on this project, and they're very common points discussed on other projects. 1, the BIM addendum doesn't change the contract relationships. It's going to stay just the way they are. Okay? 2, we have to define what a contribution is. When is somebody participating in the modeling? When are they not? And so we define contribution because then on 5.1, we are very adamant about everyone is responsible for their contribution. And so this helps alleviate lots of times with architects and designers, engineers, because they're worried about sharing their model. Because for years and years, all of the lawyers have told them, if you share your electronic documents and it gets changed, then we're going to have real problems. What this says is, sure, share your electronic documents. If somebody who's not too intelligent changes somebody else's electronic documents and then uses that change, they're responsible for that change. I mean, if one of my superintendents changes the architectural design, he's responsible for having changed that, even if the architect or not. And that's a major aspect of this BIM addendum that helps solve multiple problems with exchanging models. In 4.1, then it starts to establish collaboration. We're not saying this is the BIM execution plan, you shall follow the BIM execution plan. We say, here's a BIM execution plan, start giving us your feedback now on how we can make this work for everybody. There is a huge difference there. So whether your contract is IPD to start with, or if it's a hard bid sort of scenario, more like what we were in, you can still get that collaboration that makes BIM work. And then we actually edited it and changed 6.2 and added a little line in there that says, and display the model for project promotion and marketing purposes. Thus, we get to be here today showing you models of our project. We have owner's permission. We got that up front to be able to do that. And of course, you saw the video, they're enthusiastic about us being able to show their project. The next step we put a BIM execution plan out there. Some of the major elements we defined. We want to use this for clash detection and 4D schedule. That's some of the main things we want to do. This was at the very beginning, I think it was very shortly, if not before, LOD spec was officially released. It was right there against it. And so we were using the AIA definitions for level of development. And so we had 300 and 400 in there. And we'll talk more about some of the things we learned as we went through there. I just wanted to point out that we called out designers to 300 and then contractors taking it to 4. And then the naming convention, and there's a color code too, but the naming convention was the main point. Without that naming convention, there's no way to sort through all the models you end up using on a project. And we actually end up changing the naming convention quite significantly through the project. But it was still consistent, right? We started with one and then we had a breaking point. We went to the second one as we went through. They both work just as well. And it's easy to even interpret between them because they're both good naming conventions. The trade level of development, 400. Along with that, we gave them examples. We gave them instructions on what they would be modeling. This allowed ICER to develop pricing. This allowed the subs to develop pricing. It allowed everybody to pull this together and know to what level they were participating. And it took the chaos out of it. It made it a known factor so that we were able to understand what was coming. And so those 6 items make a big difference. We have some additional items that go with it. We actually drop down into the individual trades and we say mechanical ductwork. This is what we expect from you. Electrical, this is what we expect from you. Now, you can see here the LOD spec then went along with this because we tell electrical what they're going to model and we tell it's the LOD 400 and then the spec is the definitions of what LOD 400 is. And that's how we tie all that together. It worked really well because the subs, they were thinking that we wanted LOD 6058. I mean, they thought it was going to be some hugely detailed thing. And so this gave them definition and ability to move forward. So then we went to the practice round, and this was very beneficial for the project. We had a full-size curtain wall precast metal panel mock-up that was due to be water tested in a facility here in Texas. And so that meant that all of these different contractors had to be able to produce their parts, ship them to Texas, and assemble them. So a very small project considering, it's only a few linear feet there. But the coordination effort was significant enough that we completely modeled it. And we didn't just have one person model it. We federated this model and went through the entire process of origin points, naming conventions. We made them practice every bit of it. So you can see here that it ended up matching very well. And we solved legitimate issues. There's a curb underneath that wall. You can see it running around the bottom. They actually at one point in time had 2 different curb scenarios, and in the process of modeling this mock-up they decided that that wasn't going to work because they couldn't make the curb adjustment work within the model and the mock-up, and so they changed that for the entire project very early on in design. So here you can see they're actually reviewing it and looking over it, and it was really interesting to see how well it all just matched up. So that practice made some good steps for us very early on. So some of the things that we learned as we were using these documents. Our BIM addendum BIM execution plan. I learned that intent and purpose is very significant when someone is modeling. And so I created this graphic to be able to represent this. Whenever I send out a BIM addendum in the future, I include this graphic to go with it and I have this conversation. Yes, you are modeling. You are a designer. You're modeling. Are you modeling just to produce a 2D set of documents? Okay, that would fall on the left side, on the red side. Okay, that causes problems. You can see here, this is a screenshot of a structural model where, sure, the drawing above it looked great and everybody reviewed the drawings and everything thought it was nice. When you actually get down to the model, the precast walls are down inside of the footing. Effectively, that footing is at the wrong elevation, and when you go back to structural engineering, you say, hey, we need to move this footing down so we can clash against it, get in the right location. He says, no, there's a note on the drawings that tells you what the elevation of the footing is. You're good. And you just throw your hands in the air and all right. So that was their intent. What we found on this project is we had multiple parties that were modeling to create a design. And the model was what the intent was to actually create the building itself virtually. And then, yes, we crank out drawings. They're a reporting function. They're a necessary reporting function. We'll be using them for a very long time. They're very good, but they're the result. They're not the end. Another thing that we learned was the difference between 350 and 400. Yeah, that new LOD spec had just come out, and we were all excited about this 350, and we called out everything as 400 because we didn't really even know what 350 was yet. I quickly learned that that distinction here, shown very well in the picture, represents very much when you come down to intent and purpose again. That LOD 350 and 400 look exactly the same in the LOD spec. The pictures are the same. But what it comes down to is if they're doing 350, they're only going to model what they need to coordinate. And so the small piping, the small conduit, it doesn't get modeled because it's not efficient just to model it. And that is completely acceptable. The LOD 400 comes into play when those contractors take the next step and they're prefabricating and they're going for modularization and they are looking to increase their productivity in the field. When that happens, I see them on their own naturally going to a 400. They're modeling sections of pipe and they're modeling small conduits, even down to half-inch conduits. They're going all the way through and modeling everything because they don't want their field personnel having to make decisions. And we saw that earlier in the presentation this morning. The assembly line concept, every piece has its place and they can just walk out there and put it in. That's the difference between 350 and 400 that I have seen. And so we call 350, but we strongly encourage the contractors to go to 400 for their own benefit. We will not pay them to go to 400. That's their own. Okay, another thing we learned about LOD 500 because the owner wanted some of his owner information. I hear LOD 500 referred to quite often as the as-built model. Well, what we've learned is that no such thing as as-builts. What's happening if we are creating these models and we are installing per these models, nobody in the field should be changing anything. We don't need an additional model. We have a level 350 or a level 400 model. That is the information, that is what was installed in the field. And so we kind of eliminate the level 500 there. The other thing I've heard called out is that the LOD 500 is the owner's information. That this is what they're going to use to maintain their building and they're going to use for years to come for altering, adding to the project, things like that. My thoughts there are very similar. Okay. Earlier in this room, there was a presentation from the state of Tennessee on their BIM requirements. And this is kind of what they're after too, is that owner information is not an additional step. That owner information is gathered from concept to criteria, from the detailing from the designers, through implementation. That is where that data comes from, and it needs to be pulled from there and then provided to the owner to be used. I don't see an additional step for 500. So currently in my mind, I'm not seeing any use for LOD 500 because all the data comes from other places and other means. So those are the things that we did to try to bring this, to make sure that we're organized moving forward with a bunch of new people trying to do it. And the main theme that came out of those that process was continuous improvement. Okay, we didn't just say, no, we're going to do it this way because we're in the project. We made those adjustments. We collaborated with the team. A lot of them ended up providing a level 350 because that's all that was really practical and all that was really needed. And we didn't say, no, you're going to do 400 because it wasn't useful and purposeful for the project. Okay, with that, I'm going to let Schaeffer talk about the benefits of co-location that took place.
Thank you, Benjamin. On this project, we saw a really interesting situation arise that was really, we've seen it on other projects, but this was a really unique opportunity to do what most people understand as co-location. So when you hear the word co-location, usually we see pictures of BIM modelers from different companies coming together for day workshops or things like that. Because ICRD was hired by 8 or more contractors, and the general contractor, we literally had modelers in the same room working on multiple trades, communicating with each other across desks for months. So here you can see we have roof, drywall, stair, coordination, HVAC, plumbing, and electrical, all kind of in the same area. And this is just a number of the items we saw. Here's actually a layout of one of our studios. On the left, you see our modeling capabilities there. I'm in the middle there doing MEP and managing it. And we had enclosures, electrical, plumbing, and all of that model content being created in one space. A lot of communication across the tables, around the tables. It was a really interesting opportunity. On the right side, then we sent our models that we coordinated, and we had sheet creation in the studio next to us, so that the information we were coordinating was going straight to the field in a very, very efficient way. A couple stories on this. 2 days before Christmas, on December 23rd, we as a team got together. We'd been working on the models. They were not completely developed, but we had been looking at them, and we got together as a team for an entire day to look ahead into the next year and say, what are going to be our pinch points? What are areas where we're going to see problems? And we went through floor by floor, room by room, trade by trade, and amongst ourselves, because we had so many trades in one room that had been talking to each other and know how to communicate to each other, we were able to look ahead and find items like this one. We ended up putting out an entire memo, but this was one of them, a notable one, where there's that large monumental stair. This is going to come up again. And the MEP contractor has two large duct going from one section of the building to the other, right underneath that landing there. And someone forgot to leave in a fur down for them. So we had some gorgeous architecturally exposed ductwork under that large monumental stair. And of course, we brought this to the designer's attention, and they fixed it. But it was a result of that co-location collaboration. Another item we saw that was really interesting from co-location is we had individual technicians working on multiple trades. So this is a picture of ductwork and electrical conduit. The technician working next to me was working on both ductwork and electrical at the same time. This is one person. And so instead of after the fact clearing clashes and solving clashes, she would move through an entire area preventing clashes as she modeled, working through areas instead of doing clash detection. It was really an interesting phenomenon to watch and very effective. Another example was again at the monumental stair. What you're seeing here is ductwork, cable tray, drains, electrical, drywall in a very tight space, a lot of communication and collaboration needed for this specific instance, and just one of many. And this would have been an area where we would have had to got a lot of people from a lot of different companies together and said, hey, how are you going to work this out? What do you want to do here? And they bicker back and forth. But as a result of us all being in the same room, I looked across the table and said, hey, what's the drywall doing in this situation? What's the ductwork doing in this situation? We were able to come up with a solution very efficiently and that worked out nicely. It was really a great opportunity. Additionally, we had some ceiling clouds throughout the building, these decorative ceiling clouds that were below the ceiling level that were not going to flag a traditional clash because they were below the level, but they had interesting effects on accessibility for items above the ceiling. So since we had this collaboration, we took the ceiling clouds, masked them up to the deck, and then that flagged a clash for anything running above it, and we were able to provide the owner with a more accessible design. It was a great opportunity. But at the end of the day, this all just comes down to communication. We all know how important communication is. You know, the acronym of BIM is Building Information Modeling. As we all know, the information is the most important part of that. And so on this project, we knew that communication was a big deal. I'm talking with people on the phone daily that have really thick Cajun accents, trying to communicate large amounts of technical information. We knew this was going to be a tricky point. We knew we needed to fight the chaos. And so we are always very purposeful to communicate clearly and use whatever means possible to communicate this information to facilitate the conversation. At the end of the day, BIM is just a tool for communicating technical information and coming up with better solutions. So obviously that we all know the BIM meetings, we all know the video conferences. I'll talk specifically about the BIM meetings, but we use video conferences all the time, even just talking with individual trades. If they're walking me through a situation, I say, hey, hang on, let me put up a video conference, we'll mark up a document while we're looking at it. I'm in Dallas, they're in Monroe, Louisiana. Worked very well. We always try to pick up the phone and call someone instead of write a long email. If you're writing a long email, you should probably call them. There's just something about the human voice and communication. After the call, we always send out a conversation memo to record that information. Again, think of very thick Cajun accents. And so we're sitting here saying, this is what I heard you say, is this correct? And this was a very good way to document what you heard. We had to cross this large technology gap, which I actually think is a continuum. At the end of the day, you're going to have multiple people at multiple levels of technology involvement. Our drywall contractor was getting his first computer on this project. Our electrical contractor, he had a computer, but at the end of the day, pencil markups and highlighters is what he used. That's what you can see on the left. That's our electrical contractor. We set the plumbing contractor up with a PD authoring software, and he went to town. It was awesome. What you're seeing here, this is drawings from a plumbing contractor that are isometrics in a PDF authoring software that was just a great way to communicate. So at the end of the day, we had to be flexible with each individual person. What's the best way to communicate with this person, and not try to force them into communicating in a way that they don't know how to communicate with. That's a technology gap. Another item that we found was an obstacle to communication, and all you know, the origin point is one of the most important parts of a project. And when we got to the project, there were about as many origins as there were contractors and models. So it was quite a task. We went and spent about a week lassoing down these origins, and we actually embedded a file in the model that displays what the origins, the transitions and alpha rotations are, so that later down the road, when the owner opens up this model and says, what's the origin and where do I need to move these things, they don't have to come find Eichert or Yates. It's there in the model for them years down the road. Great tool, just an opportunity to create communication. Our BIM meetings, everybody knows BIM meetings. One item I would say is please don't go through clashes in your BIM meetings. That's just, we are very mindful of how expensive these meetings are. There's 10 to 20 highly paid, highly effective individuals in these meetings. These should be maximized for their efficiency. We had the design team on the meeting, so we really use these specifically to cover the large items. We dealt with clashes outside the meeting. That seems to be a good way to do things. Always sending out meeting minutes afterwards. That sounds cliche, but it's important. We're documenting. It's communication. At the end of the day, all this communication, you can't get away from the in-person. There's just something about being able to look somebody in the eye, shake their hand, tell them, I'm a person, you're a person, I'm okay, you're okay. This is how we work together. This is how we communicate. This is very important, especially with this type of large amounts of communication. So in the few minutes we have left, I want to talk about what are the successes we've seen. And the successes have been outstanding. This has just been a great success. There's been challenges along the way, but at the end of the day, we've seen a lot of value added to the design team, to the general contractor, to the contractors, to the owner. This has been really great. The first item was an expansion joint issue that came up. We had some floor deflection built into the design. Problem was nobody had really dealt with what it was going to do on the exterior, and as a result, they were talking about some sort of a expansion joint issue. Problem was the water intrusion issue. How are we going to waterproof this? How are we going to make this work? None of the trades would warranty it. And so, as we all know, the waterproofing and water intrusion is a high litigation option, high litigation concern, and so the owner really was interested in this one. We found the issue, proposed a tube steel solution. The design team looked at it, analyzed it, decided to go with that. It took the deflection out of the floor, made it to where the waterproofing was more feasible, and at the end of the day, this is gonna give the owner peace of mind. It makes it a constructible design. Big success. Communication. As we continued around the enclosures, we did a specific coordination on all the enclosure surfaces. You can't really do clash detection on these, so we looked at each place where two or more finishes came together and said, do we have enough information to build this correctly the first time? And if we didn't, we asked the design team. A lot of value added there. As we moved into the building on the interiors, on the MEP systems, there was a specific situation where there were perimeter slot diffusers putting air on the glass, washing the glass. Turns out the steel and the diffusers are sharing the same space. It's not going to work all that well. We brought it to their attention. They developed a solution. At the end of the day, it's a constructible design, communication. Drywall, we took traditional information from our drywall contractors. They said, hey, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem. We made that communication with the MEP. They said, we need access here, we need access here. At the end of the day, we made a more constructible, more accessible building. As a result of that, mixing traditional knowledge with cutting-edge technology. Great success. One of the largest successes was actually the penthouse. Like Benjamin said, the entire 4th floor is a mechanical penthouse, large air handling units, huge ductwork, 100-something inches wide, very expensive fittings. The design team, like we said, the MEP design team was working in 2-dimension. It looked great in 2-dimension. It really did. Problem was, it's not going to fit. We got up there, we worked with the contractors. They said, this is not going to fit, or this is not going to fit. So we started meeting regularly with the MEP design team saying, how do you want us to get this in there? How do you want us to lay this out so that when we do put this in there, we're going to have a design that works, that's accessible. On the left, you can see what it would have looked like and if we went with the original design. On the right is an example of the solutions we came up with. This was highly value added for everybody involved. The owner, at the end of the day, gets a building that is functional. It's great. So this was just an opportunity we saw to introduce the BIM technology and sociology into a culture that had not seen it yet, and produce communication between everyone and see great successes throughout the project. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Benjamin to close us out.
So before I go to the next slide, that origin slide made me realize that all these different origins, but as Schaeffer and I talked to the contractors and we asked them, well, where's your origin? Every one of them said it's at 000. And so that origin is always an interesting conversation. I think I need to find a better way to ask that question. So in conclusion, all of our projects, there's always chaos hiding there somewhere. Whether you're in the swamps or you're in the north or you're in another country, it's always there. And the idea is if you're watching out for it, you try to find it ahead of time and identify where it can pop up and try to flush it out. Make sure that chaos is a known element and do something to try to negate it. Traditionally, we've found that good people can navigate past the chaos without getting hurt. They can always get around it. We've been doing that for years and years and years. But what happens is when we start involving good people with BIM, we can eliminate the chaos. All right? And you can find your people from your project just out there slaying those gators for us. So I would like to finish with a quote from Wolf.
I don't think there should be any doubt, having gone through it, that you would use more BIM.
Short, but exceptionally distinct. First time owner, never done it before, says without a doubt, more BIM. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.